This happened fairly recently at a wildlife management area near my hometown. I won't reveal its exact location, but it's in a densely wooded region near the Connecticut-Rhode Island border. A favorite spot of me and my friends was a lake in the center of the wildlife management area. We called it the Hole because of its purported deepness. There was a small cluster of picnic tables on the lake's far side where we'd party at night when it was warm outside. For the most part, I had a lot of wonderful memories associated with the Hole, where I had my first hookup, caught my biggest fish, and even celebrated a few birthdays. After that fateful night, however, those memories became meaningless. Not only was the Hole our hangout, but we used it to stash our liquor, tobacco, and other party favors. On this particular night, there were 5 of us: Rob, my best friend, Tanner, who lived down the street from me, Uma, a foreign exchange student we befriended, Pam, my cousin, and myself. Earlier that day, Rob and Tanner visited the Hole to hide a bottle of vodka we planned to drink that night, saying they stashed it in the crevice of a boulder along the trail that took us to the picnic tables. Our plans changed unexpectedly when Pam said we could drink at her house. All we had to do was retrieve the bottle, which was easier said than done at 10 p.m. Uma and Pam stayed with the car, while Rob, Tanner, and myself went to go get the bottle. Despite its relatively secluded location, the trails were maintained pretty routinely and appeared to have been worked on earlier today. After about 15 minutes of walking, we approached the trail's first junction, which either took you around the lake or deeper into the woods. "This doesn't feel right," Tanner exclaimed as we all came to a halt. "We didn't come this far. Did we pass it?" Rob and I exchanged glances with mixed expressions of bewilderment and frustration before he replied, "No, Tanner, we've used that boulder to hide shit multiple times before. How do you not know where it is by now?" Rob replied in a tone that sounded like he was asking a question. "You're even the one who picked the damn spot." Tanner shrugged. "Everything just looks different at night, I guess." Rob grumbled something before he resumed walking. I couldn't quite hear what he said, but it seemed to anger Tanner. They'd been edgy toward each other all night, so I assumed they had a previous argument they hadn't settled. I'm sure the night's hot, humid conditions also didn't necessarily help lighten the mood. "Let's just find it and get back," I added, trying to keep the peace. "We've only been out here 15 minutes, and I'm already matted with sweat." We walked in silence for another couple of minutes until something caught Tanner's attention. "Look at this," Tanner said, briefly stepping out of the headlamp's light and re-emerging from the darkness, brandishing a small orange chainsaw. "Why would you leave something like this just chilling alongside the trail?" "Probably because they're coming back tomorrow to finish whatever they're working on," Rob said quickly, wincing when Tanner started aimlessly waving the chainsaw in the air. "Just put it down, dude. You're wasting time." Tanner scoffed at Rob's comment and resumed walking. "Nobody's gonna fuck with us if we got one of these," Tanner said, part jokingly and part seriously. "Do you even know how to use it?" Rob asked condescendingly as him and I struggled to keep up with Tanner, who was lavishing over the newfound sense of invincibility he seemingly acquired from discovering the chainsaw. Tanner didn't respond and did a slow 360-degree spin as he stuck the chainsaw out and lazily swung it horizontally. "You're gonna fucking kill someone," Rob barked, stopping dead in his tracks during Tanner's graceful chainsaw spin, despite being well over 20 paces from where he stood. I could hear Rob mumble things like, "It's always something with him," or "He always has to find something to sidetrack us," but didn't say anything, knowing how arguing was a huge component of Rob and Tanner's volatile friendship. Tanner was definitely the most immature out of us, where Rob was very subtle, yet temperamental. I hoped retrieving the bottle would be simple and seamless, so we could get back to the car, out of this sticky, heavy humidity. without Rob and Tanner engaging in another round of arguments. Rob and Tanner had mixed reactions when we reached the boulder where the vodka was supposedly stored. Tanner stopped rather abruptly while Rob continued walking toward the boulder. "This doesn't feel right," Tanner said as he surveyed our surroundings. "I really don't think this is the one we left it in, bro." Tanner and I watched Rob encircle the boulder before stepping up and inspecting a side that was obstructed from my view. Rob adjusted his headlamp a few times, shifting his stance and arms for nearly 2 minutes before he finally stepped back and turned towards us. "It's not here," Rob said flatly. "I told you," Tanner snapped back, dropping the chainsaw whose clank echoed throughout the forest. "We hid the bottle." "To fucking gather," Rob barked, anger and frustration growing in each of his words as he turned to face Tanner. "If that's where we hid it, why isn't it there anymore?" Tanner quickly asked. "I don't know. Maybe someone took it," Rob replied while he started walking toward Tanner. "Or maybe because that's not where we fucking left it. How do you not even remember? Are you really that dumb? Is your brain really that fried already from the barrage of shit you smoke, snort, or pop?" That was the last I heard before zoning the two out while they bickered. I walked over to the boulder and inspected it myself, carefully walking around it, before beginning to thoroughly inspect the crevice where Rob claimed to have stashed the bottle. There was indeed nothing inside, as Rob claimed. I didn't doubt Rob's story, figuring Tanner must have been too stoned to notice at the time, and some other kids took it for themselves. We weren't the only ones who hung out here, and have previously come across other kids' stashes in the hiding spots we used. I was annoyed upon realizing we didn't have anything to drink tonight, and dreaded how the girls would react upon learning the news. My train of thought was disrupted by Rob, uttering something in a screeching shriek, to which Tanner responded with his own banshee-like screams. I quickly ran over and separated them, unable to precisely decipher what they were fighting about, since they were shouting over each other. While I didn't know what escalated their argument, I could tell looking at their faces they were both seething. Upon separating them, I had to push against Rob, who still tried coming at Tanner, who started stomping back down the path. The last thing I heard Tanner say was, "Fuck you both," before a quick scrapping and metallic thump broke out, followed by Tanner's gasp, getting cut short by a squishy crunch thump. I felt Rob's body stiffen as he stopped trying to force himself forward. Leaning back, the fury anger in Rob's eyes was now replaced by shock and sheer terror, his trembling jaw hanging open, as the expression on his face seemed frozen in disbelief from whatever he stared at over my shoulder. When I looked behind me, my headlamp light shone on Tanner, lying face down on the ground, his twitching limbs sprawling out in different directions, a reddish-beige tip protruding from the back of Tanner's head, around which I quickly noticed a pool of blood was forming. I detached myself from Rob as we both stared in disbelief for a few seconds, before hurrying over towards Tanner's limp body. "What happened?" I started asking frantically to Rob, whose stunned wide-eyed expression hadn't changed. It was an accident," Rob managed to sputter out after a few seconds, his eyes unable to move off Tanner. He tipped over the chainsaw and he fell." A heavy knotty feeling formed in my stomach when I realized the tip jutting out from the back of Tanner's head was a jagged edge of a small tree stump that must have been cut down earlier today. Tanner tipped over the chainsaw he was playing with, lost his footing, and landed directly onto the stump's pointed tip face first. "We have to get help," I said, facing Rob, who was visibly struggling to maintain his composure. Unable to speak, Rob shakily nodded his head in response to my comment as his eyes remained fixed on Tanner's motionless body. "Stay with him. Can you do that?" I quickly asked Rob, who lightly gestured with his head that he would. "I'm gonna run back to the car, call for help, and let the girls know what happened. I'll be back soon as possible." I didn't wait for Rob to respond and bolted back down the path, trying to run as fast as my feet would take me. Amid navigating the dark rocky trail, My heart pounded and my mind raced with the recurring image of Tanner's stiff twitching body, while the reality of what just happened, along with the drastic shift of events this night took, struggled to set in with me. About halfway back to the parking lot, I stopped alongside the trail and vomited profusely, forcing myself to take a few slow, deep breaths before resuming my sprint. I was able to reach the parking lot in under 10 minutes, finding Pam and Uma still sitting in the car, both fixated on their phones. The girls were startled when I frantically pounded on the glass, gesturing for them to step out of the vehicle. They seemed hesitant at first, probably thinking I was pulling some sort of prank, until they noticed the genuine fear and panic in my eyes. I quickly called the police, saying there was an accident, and gave them our location. Pam and Uma were now visibly concerned, and asking what was happening soon as I hung up with the cops. There's been an accident, I stammered, realizing my body visibly shaking while I struggled to catch my breath. Tanner's hurt. He's hurt bad. Where's Rob? Pam asked urgently, to which I noted he stayed back with Tanner. We have to try to move him, I said while motioning for the three of us to head back down the trail. Cops won't be here for another 30-40 minutes. We have to try to get him back to the parking lot. The girls started asking what exactly happened to Tanner as I took them down the trail. I was so focused on getting back to Tanner and Rob, I didn't answer them at first. I eventually spewed a vague response, simply stating, "He fell and is bleeding really bad," in between short gasps of air, while trying to maintain a steady running pace. We returned to the spot where I left Tanner and Rob, but neither were anywhere to be seen. I quickly noticed the stump Tanner fell on that was still encompassed by a fresh coating of blood, which stained the ground. After pointing it out and catching my breath, I finally had a chance to explain what actually happened to the girls, who responded with disturbed expressions of disgust and alarm. "So, where are they now, then?" Pam blurted, yelling at me like I was to blame for the incident. "I don't know. I told Rob to stay with Tanner, so maybe he managed to start moving him back to the car," I replied with a blatant absence of confidence in my voice, trying to remain ignorant of the inevitability that Tanner had more than likely been killed from his fall. Before anyone could say anything else, the sound of shuffling footsteps accompanied with a teeth-gritting, squishy crunch sound came from down the path. In the darkened section my headlamp's light couldn't reach. The three of us froze and stared intently toward where the noise came from, the footsteps appearing to get louder. I eventually started making out a human-shaped figure in the darkness that appeared to be taking staggered, stumbling steps, like someone who was deathly impaired. When the figure stepped into my headlamp's light, all three of us released terrified gasps and yelps. A gaping fist-sized hole was in the center of Tanner's mangled, bloodied face, where he had been impaled by the stump, his head hanging limp on his neck and bobbling side to side, looking like a broken toy. He was completely nude, with blood streaking down the front of his torso, while his arms remained completely motionless and swayed lazily in conjunction with his discombobulated footsteps. That popping, crunching sound emitted every time any one of Tanner's bodily joints shifted, his skin now deathly corpse-like pale tone and covered with mottled grayish-blue patches. As much as I wanted to believe Tanner was somehow alive, it was abundantly clear something wasn't right. I heard Pam and Uma begin whimpering as Tanner took his lurching steps towards us, stopping when he was about 9 or 10 paces from where we stood. There was a tense stretch of seconds before I shakily uttered Tanner's name, after which his back made an abrupt arch, unnaturally bending backwards 90 degrees as a popping crunch emanated throughout our vicinity. Tanner's swift movements made Pam and Uma shriek, after which he started racing toward where we stood. Our fight or flight instincts activated, the three of us swiftly pivoting and bolting back down the trail. I was convinced I heard that popping, crunching, and Tanner's wobbling footsteps following close behind us in our dash back to the parking lot. I remained focused on what I could see in front of me until we reached the car. Pam and Uma were crying hysterically as I pivoted and shined my headlamp back down the trail to see we were no longer being chased, but couldn't shake off the smothering feeling something was still watching us Within the forest impenetrable darkness, we all instinctively scrambled toward the car, but paused when Pam asked about Rob. In the ensuring silence that materialized when she asked this question, we picked up the sound of a soft whimpering that came from the cluster of nearby bushes. Shining my headlamp in that direction, I immediately noticed a figure making subtle movements and quickly realized it was Rob. We found him behind the brush on his knees with his face buried in his hands. He was sobbing and frantically rocking back and forth. His clothes were covered in sweat, mud, and what appeared to be blood. "Rob," I said in a soft but shaky voice while warily approaching him. "We gotta go, bro. Let me help you to the car. It's right." Rob started repeatedly mumbling the same phrases. I don't know what I saw. It was so real, and I keep seeing it. I couldn't stop seeing it. When I extended a hand out to Rob, he became still and silent for a few seconds before lowering his hands, which I realized were coated in blood, and lifted his head. His eyes were missing, and 2 empty black pits were now in their place, with blood streaking down his face's entire front side. Anything else I might have heard were drowned out in the girl's onslaught of frantic, horrific screams. Uma dove into the car, while Pam raced down the road in a full-on panic. I just stood completely frozen, unable to say or do anything but stare at Rob's disfigured, bloodied, eyeless face. Rob has been institutionalized since that night. I visit him a few times, but trying to communicate is a waste of time, since all he does is cry or mumble gibberish. I tried asking what he saw that night, but he breaks out into hysterics. Only once did Rob utter something understandable, and what he said still sends chills down my spine. "You can't hear the crunching?" The last time I visit, Rob started violently smashing his head against the wall, after which I was asked not to return. Tanner's body was never found, despite a thorough search and investigation. Pam and I were never really the same after that, and Uma moved out of town shortly, never telling us where her family relocated. I never returned to visit that wildlife management area, and ever since visiting Rob last, started hearing shuffling footsteps accompanied with a squishy crunching sound. It always happened at night. The noises came from outside, and instantly reminded me of the movements Tanner's limp, mangled body made whenever he moved, which is what I visualize whenever I hear them and close my eyes. I never saw anything on the few instances I've mustered up the courage to check, and nobody else seems to hear the eerie sounds. It's been sporadically happening in the months since I last saw Rob, but something recently changed about this inexplicable phenomenon that prompted me to share this tale. Lately, these noises are coming from inside.